I always like to see seats around the drum.
Thanks again for everything.
All right.
We got top flight security with us, guys. Got one bus. Hey, put that out. All right. All right, you guys, go ahead. Put that out there. Hold on. Hey, brother. Look at yours. KC said he can hear you. Hey!
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. If you were handed a commemorative commemorative water bottle upon arrival, we ask that you please return that water bottle to a security checkpoint.
Same with the water bottle.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you were handed a commemorative metal water bottle upon arrival, we'd ask that you please return that water bottle to a security checkpoint. You are able to retrieve that water bottle upon departure for lunch. We'd also ask that you please take your seats at this time. Thank you.
Thank you guys. Shake your hand. I can't get back.
Returning this year, the Native American Women's Warriors were founded in 2010. They are recognized as the first all-female Native American Veterans Color Guard team. They strive to assist fellow Native American veterans, support their cultural values, and aid those transitioning out from the military. They also provide aid where needed and support those suffering from post-traumatic stress and other emotional and behavioral health issues acquired during military service. They also assist with employment readiness while providing support for Native veterans in meeting their cultural and higher learning goals. Supporting the Color Guard is Scissortail, a world champion Southern drum group based out of Shawnee, Oklahoma. Scissortail singers hail from the Pawnee, Sac and Fox, Comanche, Kiowa, Oto-Missouri, and Cherokee tribes. They have traveled extensively across Indian country serving as host Southern drum, having won the world-class Southern singing competition at the Gathering of Nations powwow numerous times. Now please welcome our Color Guard.
for her?
DOG for her, yes.
DOG.
Please welcome Vice Chair Crystal Williams of the Coushatta Tribe of Louisiana for our opening prayer.
Good morning. Alila mo haslag yanihta. Anap ko sa atifun ontilichagum. Ajayok pa hos hachimpuli kalahig yanihta. Good morning, everybody. My name is Crystal Williams. I'm the vice chair for the Coushatta Tribe of Louisiana, and I'm so honored to be here. I'm so honored to give the invocation this morning. And if everybody can bow your heads so we can pray to our Creator. Abachokule, thank you for bringing together all these tribal delegates on this momentum occasion. Thank you for safe travels to the White House to meet with other American leaders. Thank you for all our tribal nation leaders who came before us. Thank you for their work, their dedication, their voices and leadership that brought us here today. Thank you for giving us the voices to speak for those that are no longer here with us. Abachokole, I pray that you open the minds of our leaders. I pray that you open the minds of our nation. I ask that you soften our hearts and open our ears. I pray that our voices are heard. I pray that our leaders listen and that our ancestors' words are honored. Abachokole, I pray that you bless our leaders' wisdom. I pray that you bless our leaders' discernment. I pray that you bless our nations with opportunity, with abundance and prosperity. I pray that you bless our elders for sharing the stories of our nations. I pray that you bless our elders for gifting us their wisdom. I pray that you bless our elders for guarding our traditions and our cultures and our lands. I pray that you give our youth clarity for our future. I pray that our youth become strong leaders. I pray that our youth remain strong to carry on the legacy of our nations. Abachokole, I pray that you bring peace to our nations. I pray that this summit brings forth a new era of understanding amongst our nations. I pray that all our delegates have a safe journey back home to their nations and their people, and that our journeys are filled with peace and prosperity. Bless each and every leader, nation, and delegate, and please bless this event. Abachokole, Ali Lamo Yanihta Ko Hiskak. In Jesus' name, amen.
Please welcome Secretary of the United States Department of the Interior, Deb Haaland.
Watsi haupa, du hinamet its atuitsa shuimi hanu. Greetings, tribal leaders, elders, veterans, community members, and friends. I'm so honored to welcome you to the Biden-Harris administration's third annual White House Tribal Nations Summit, and I'm so sad not to be there in person. I wish I could be with you all to gather and connect, but it turns out that not even I am immune to COVID. In some ways, me being sick is a good way to remind all of us where we have been in the year since the pandemic impacted the globe, and of course, put a spotlight onto the inequities we have always known exist in Indigenous communities. In 3 years, we've made big, challenging, and transformative accomplishments, all with representation from all of you. This is our third year in office, and now things look very different because we have taken your words and feedback and put them into action. Throughout this administration, our work is guided by Indian country, for Indian country, because representation matters. It matters in how we advocate for resources, guide investments, and act on policy that impacts our people now and into the future. As you'll hear over the next few days, we've made significant progress this year through investments in infrastructure, communities, and people. Across President Biden's Investing in America agenda, a historic $45 billion, more than 15 years worth of the Bureau of Indian Affairs annual budget has gone into Indian country. You've heard me say it before, but that number bears repeating, a $45 billion investment in Indian country. With that comes transformational change. We're protecting cultural resources like salmon, which Pacific Northwest tribes have stewarded for thousands of years. This year, I was humbled to celebrate an agreement between the federal government and the Coeur d'Alene, Colville, and Spokane tribes to reintroduce salmon into the upper Columbia River and protect the health and longevity of these sacred waters. We're making long overdue investments in critical water infrastructure for communities like the Hopi tribe in Arizona. Since the 1960s, the tribe has suffered from toxic levels of arsenic in its water supply. But with over $15 million in bipartisan infrastructure law funding, this hazard will soon be a thing of the past. I was grateful to visit Hopi to support this project. We're also boosting local economies. In May, I joined the Mescalero Apache Nation in New Mexico to celebrate the groundbreaking of a new project funded by the bipartisan infrastructure law that will provide a safer travel route through the community and in turn boost the tribe's local economy. And we're directing billions in funding to tribes to plug harmful orphaned oil and gas wells, industry relics that spew toxic gases and threaten the health of our communities. The department recently announced $40 million for this initiative as a piece of our broader effort to address environmental injustice across Indian country. We know that gaining access to federal resources is not always easy, particularly for smaller tribes. Through the White House Council on Native American Affairs, which I co-chair with Domestic Policy Advisor Neera Tanden, we will make sure that we're not just delivering more resources for Indian country, but that they are getting to Indian country. You'll hear from the president later today about exciting new announcements, but I want to focus on one in particular. Although the Access to Capital Initiative, through the Access to Capital Initiative, we are publishing a new draft request for information. Once finalized, this RFI will help the federal government identify for the first time tribal nations' access to and need for federal funding. We'll be taking this draft directly to tribes for consultation in January of next year, and we welcome your feedback. Once final, I hope that all of you consider filling this out. It will be an incredibly valuable tool in finally assessing what the total need is in your communities. We're working to remedy decades of underfunding, and that includes harnessing the purchasing power of the federal government. The Buy Indian Act is one of our best tools for empowering Native-owned businesses as federal contractors. Interior's bureaus awarded over $1.4 billion to Native-owned businesses in fiscal year 2023, with Indian Affairs bureaus awarding more than 70% of eligible contract funds to Native business owners. These achievements are significant. This is why representation matters. For decades, the federal government worked to oppress Indian people through policies like forced removal, termination, adoptions of Indian children, land fractionation, language loss, and assimilation through federal Indian boarding schools. But this year, decades after these devastating policies were implemented, we had some big news in the effort to rebuild what was taken from us. First, the Supreme Court stood behind the Indian Child Welfare Act. The forced removal of Indian children from their families was a targeted attack that inflicted trauma on children, families, and communities that people continue to feel today. This important decision upheld what presidents and congressional majorities on both sides of the aisle and all of us have recognized for the past 4 decades. Earlier this week, we announced the conclusion of the land buyback program for tribal nations. This program partnered with more than 50 tribes in 15 states to consolidate and restore tribal trust ownership on nearly 3 million acres. More than $1.69 billion was paid to more than 123,000 individuals. $60 million contributed to the Cobell Education Scholarship Fund, and more than 12,000 scholarships awarded to date. I'm very proud of the department's work to implement this program and realize Eloise Cobell's vision to restore tribal homelands. Today, we will publish final amendments to the department's fee to trust regulations that will make the land into trust process more efficient. This is another step to put power back in the hands of tribal communities in determining how their lands are used. Our federal Indian boarding school initiative has also taken several important steps forward. Remember that last year we published volume 1 of an investigative report that examined the role of the federal government and this department in perpetrating these policies. Early next year, we expect to release volume 2, informed in part by our experiences on the road to healing. With the support of Assistant Secretary Brian Newland and his team, we completed 12 stops across Indian country on the road to healing. We heard directly from survivors, descendants, and their families. I am so grateful to those of you who hosted us on this journey. It was an honor to be with you and your communities to listen, share, and heal together. Now, with new funding from the Mellon Foundation and the National Endowment for the Humanities, we've launched an oral history project to document the experiences of Indigenous children who attended the federal boarding school system. I'm excited to see what this work and a collaboration with the Smithsonian Institute will produce, because all Americans should know of this history. It is undeniable that federal policies set out to break Indigenous peoples, to destroy our cultures, our lifeways, and our inherent connection to the land. I think it is also undeniable that those policies failed. They failed to break us, and now we're bringing every resource to bear to restore what they set out to destroy. I want to talk about several ways we're doing this. One is in addressing the centuries-long epidemics of missing and murdered Indigenous peoples and human trafficking. As a Congresswoman, I champion the Not Invisible Act, and it gives me great pride to see it implemented as Secretary. The Not Invisible Act Commission, established by our agency and the Justice Department, recently submitted its recommendations to our departments and to Congress on how to best address this crisis. The implementation of these recommendations is crucial. We must call out the gaps that persist among federal, state, county, and tribal law enforcement agencies, and we must implement collaborative, case-specific task forces in partnership with regional law enforcement and tribal communities. Another step we're taking is addressing the protection and preservation of Indigenous resources and cultures across our country through updates to the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, NAGPRA. Today, we're publishing a final rule to use this essential tool for the safe return of sacred objects to the communities from which they were stolen, and to strengthen the authority and role of Indigenous communities in the repatriation process. Importantly, we're also investing in the protection of languages. Alongside the Department of Education and other partners, we are developing a 10-year national plan guided by tribal leaders and native language teachers to revitalize our languages through an all-of-government strategy. Rebuilding our bonds means ensuring that tribes have a meaningful role in the protection of the lands and waters they have always cared for. This year, we celebrated President Biden's designation of 2 new national monuments that have tribal co-management as a foundation of their establishment. From the desert valley of Avikwame National Monument to the sprawling majesty of Baj Nawabjo Ita Kukbeni, ancestral footprints of the Grand Canyon National Monument, tribes are a vital part of how these special places will be shared with the world. At last year's summit, we announced that 20 co-stewardship agreements had been signed by our administration in the previous year. Well, in the year since, another 190 co-stewardship agreements have been signed by our administration. Tribes from coast to coast play a greater role in the management of the lands and waters they have cared for since time immemorial. This year, we worked to put $2 billion from our Investing in America agenda toward the protection of at-risk ecosystems. From the bison that roam the iconic prairie grasslands to the salmon of Alaska's rivers, we're incorporating Indigenous knowledge into every facet of this work. Today, our department is publishing a new chapter in our departmental manual that formalizes Indigenous knowledge as a foundational piece of our mission. It is essential that we do everything we can to ensure that Indigenous knowledge helps guide our ongoing work, because by acknowledging and empowering tribes as partners in co-stewardship of our country's lands and waters, every American will benefit from strengthened management of our federal land and resources. These changes build on ongoing efforts like our work to strengthen Alaska Native representation on the Federal Subsistence Board and to elevate the Office of Subsistence Management within the department, which the President proposed in his fiscal year 2024 request to Congress. I often think of the world we are leaving to our children, the young people who are already taking action to defend our planet. That's why I launched the Indian Youth Service Corps, and why we're supercharging this effort with $15 million from the Inflation Reduction Act. It's why we're partnering with AmeriCorps and the Aspen Institute to help post-secondary Native students excel, while building the public-private partnerships we need to create additional community-led projects across the country. It's why we work to remove the SQ word from more than 650 geographic features, and why our Advisory Committee on Reconciliation and Place Names is working with communities to identify other locations where derogatory names must be changed. And it's why we're investing in education and advancement of Native youth. I'm so grateful to the teachers, faculty, and staff across the Bureau of Indian Education schools who instill in our children the knowledge and wisdom they need to excel in our ever-changing world. With tools like the Great American Outdoors Act, we are investing $285 million into BIE schools for improved infrastructure, classrooms, and so much more. Our students deserve every possible resource to foster exceptional learning and to connect them with everything the world and the internet has to offer. That's why this administration is focused on bringing reliable, high-speed internet to tribal lands, which remain the most digitally disconnected areas in the United States. The important progress on the Tribal Spectrum Memorandum signed between federal agencies and our new Office of Indigenous Connectivity and Technology will accelerate this work. In fact, we're advertising for a new director as we speak. As I wrap up, I want to talk about how we tell our stories. There are parts of our history that are painful, but they do not define us. We define ourselves by the world we collectively build for current and future generations. It is up to all of us to tell our stories, and not just the stories of the bad times, but of those that we celebrate, those that show our resilience, our strength, and our contributions. That's why I've challenged the National Park Service to think about how, as the nation's storyteller, they can partner with tribes to tell a more complete story of American history, including how our national parks interpret and preserve our history, such as the boarding school and assimilation eras. I'm also pleased to announce the launch of a new theme study led by the Park Service to broaden how we interpret and understand the Indian reorganization period, one of the most consequential periods of our history. Stretching from the 30s to the 50s, we saw for the first time since colonization, federal support for Indigenous cultures, economic recovery, self-determination, and governance. While injustices and the continued implementation of assimilation policies persisted in many Indigenous communities, this is a period that deserves our attention. I look forward to seeing what the service creates with the help and input of your communities. If there's one thing you feel hopeful about today, let it be this. The progress we've made together is substantial. It's history making, and it's thanks to the folks in this room and in our communities that we are building a future our people deserve. You'll see a different format for the summit this year, informed by your feedback to create more opportunities to engage directly with agency leaders in nation-to-nation discussions. I'm so grateful for the roles you all play in this essential and shared work. Thank you so much for being here and for your faith and commitment that together we will continue to build progress for our future. And before I close, I just want to say thank you to everyone who worked so hard to put this summit on. All of the staff at the Department of the Interior have been amazing and awesome. And I really hope that you enjoy yourselves over the next couple of days. Dawa.
Give me 1 second, I'll line them up.
Please welcome to the stage our panel on protecting tribal homelands in an era of climate change.
Greetings, and welcome to the Tribal Nations Summit panel on protecting tribal homelands in an era of climate change. My name is Wahala Johns. I'm the Director of Office of Indian Energy Policy and Programs at Department of Energy. My clans are Salt, born for the Red Bottom people. My maternal grandparents are Mini Goats, and my paternal grandparents are Towering House people. I'm from northeastern Arizona, and I'm really honored to be moderating this panel today. This panel will highlight some of the major progress made under several of President Biden and the administration's initiatives to protect tribal homelands and the environment. Some of those initiatives that we'll discuss today are the President's Tribal Homelands Initiative, his executive order on revitalizing our nation's commitment to environmental justice for all, his presidential memorandum on restoring healthy and abundant salmon, steelhead, and other native fish populations in the Columbia River Basin, national monument designations, and co-stewardship agreements. Additionally, we will highlight the importance of co-stewardship and Indigenous knowledge, specifically through DOE's policy and programs, as well as the Office of Science, Technology Policy and Center of Environmental Quality's Indigenous Knowledge Guidance Memo. We also want to announce and learn more about the Hanford National Monument Sacred Sites MOU. Never has there been a time like now when the federal government and tribes have come together to overcome the crisis of our lifetime, climate change. And I'm not sure if any of you know, but 80% of the biodiversity globally is on Indigenous or near Indigenous homelands. In today's panel, we'll hear from esteemed tribal and federal leaders and experts, and then make some time for audience questions and answers. I'd like now to introduce our panel and ask them to provide opening remarks about the issues and actions they are working on in this space. First, we will hear from Nancy James, Chief of Gwich'in in tribal government. Chief James, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, and good morning. It is a privilege and an honor to be asked to be part of the panel. I'd also like to, before start, Shechi Chukdren Inta Nitlisha Girecha and Jet Nitlisan Rinchel. I'm happy to be here to talk to the chiefs. I honor every chief being a chief because I know what it takes to be a chief before we say anything. But global warming, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the tribal administration for recognizing global warming. It is beyond reality when we have to be talking and convince people that their global warming is happening. Let me give you a reality check. I'm from Fort Yukon, Kuchaje, 8 miles above the Arctic Circle. It's recorded in the state of Alaska, it has the coldest temperature of 72 below, 100 above in July. As of December 4th, the coldest that we have received so far, which we should be thankful for, but you could see the reality of the global warming that's affecting our people, the way of life, food security. It's becoming to be a #1 problem for our people. But I was going back to, it was only 23 below. That's the coldest that we have gone so far. Reality check. When you go down on the river, and you could, in the month, even now, our people cannot cross that river. And that's not just for Yukon. This is across Alaska. Many of our people need that river to go to the villages and to visit each other, but most of all, to do subsistence way of life and fishing and hunting. We have a fishing issue because of global warming, even though people will not recognize it because of the water change, the ecosystem. And the fishing are people that sacrifice in the lower Yukon, all the way up to our neighbors and the Canadian. We are asked not to fish. Is that not because of global warming? Because of the water and less water? Reality check. When you see in the month of November 20th, bears walking, looking for a den when they should be in their den in October. Reality check. When we have the largest waterfall in the Yukon Flats that's recognized by the National Fish and Wildlife, and you see different birds, robins. Now, reality check. Global warming has affected every one of us today. And we need to be thankful to be good stewards of the land as Native people that we have been given, because it reality check to our chiefs and to remind myself to take care of our people, to be good stewards of the land and resources and the animals surrounding us. We are instructed when we are given by that land. And to recognize that instruction to take care of our people and the resources. And yet we're talking about food security. Food security. And our people in the Yukon Flats area and our neighbors further down in Anvik, our Canadian brothers and sisters in Canada, we are sacrificing fishing food security. We are asked by the state not to fish. And you know what? Being who we are as Native people, we acknowledge hoping. And we gave up fishing, and we're going into the 4th year. Reality check. Is that global warming because of the water resources? The question is, how long could my people sacrifice not fishing while you see others in the commercial fishing in the ocean, and our neighbors fishing? And here again, as Native people, we are asked to sacrifice. And as usual, we honor because we care for other people. And so global warming is affecting, and I acknowledge the tribal administration, the Obama administration, for acknowledging that, because it has to come from the higher ups. But our president has acknowledged this and set aside a lot of funds to do that. And we need to help our tribes. We need to help each other to put in for these tribes so we could exercise 93-638 to be able to govern and make decisions for ourselves with these resources. And I also like to recognize the department for recognizing in Huslia and Kuchaje tribal. Okay, the question is, here's $5 million. You have an erosion problem. Show me what you're going to do with it. Mm-hmm. And that's a question when we are asked to be governed ourselves, let the community, let the leaders make their own decisions to govern themselves in the community. And so that opportunity has opened up.
Thank you, Chief James.
And take advantage of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those remarks, Chief James. Next, we'll go to Tyson Johnston, the Director of Self-Governance of the Quinault Indian Nation.
Nugui on behalf of the Quinault Indian Nation, I'm honored to be in front of you, our esteemed tribal leaders and colleagues. My name is Tyson Johnston. I'm the Self-Governance Executive Director for the Quinault Indian Nation. We're a tribe that's located in Northwest Washington State, and we're a party to the Treaty of Olympia of 1856. I really appreciate Chief James' remarks and really want to echo everything that she raised. I'm here in particular because I'm a member of the Quinault Indian Nation's Community-Driven Relocation Program Task Force that's charged with implementing the relocation of our villages, implementation of our master planning efforts, and adapting our climate change adaptation strategy into an operational framework. We also are working together to marshal public and private resources to get across the finish line. These are very capital-intensive needs that we have to work through to make meaningful adjustments to climate change and how it's impacting our communities. My community is on the Pacific Coast in particular. We are vulnerable to sea level rise and are seeing things happen in our area that have never happened in elders' lifetimes. And so having climate adaptation to protect our communities and give our future generations an opportunity to not only live but thrive is a key component of our work. So I'll turn back over to you, but thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Director Johnston. And next, we have Secretary of Department of Energy, Jennifer Granholm.
Great, thank you, Wahala, thank you. I mean, Wahala works in the Department of Energy and is amazing. So grateful for your leadership and guidance. And so grateful to be on the panel with these incredible tribal leaders, as well as, of course, Brenda Mallory, who's my partner in making sure we address climate change in the federal government. So I just briefly, the Department of Energy has a lot of resources to be able to now help tribes achieve your own goals and aspirations with respect to clean energy and addressing climate change. It's been part of our legacy. I mean, the department and our Office of Indian Energy has helped tribes in the past. I think, for example, Chief James, I think we helped provide solar panels for a greenhouse and a community building. In 2021, Director Johnson, I think we helped similarly, solar on community. Just a couple of examples. We want to do this in a very broad way. So our efforts are about supporting tribes build their own energy capacity. Second, about supporting projects that make energy affordable and reliable and accessible. When I say affordable, of course, we know that solar energy is the cheapest form of energy in many places. And collectively with the efforts that I know we have worked on, we've been able to help tribal members save on their energy bills, millions and millions of dollars. But now it's also a lot about accessibility. So there are a lot of tribes who are now connected for the first time to the grid and have asked for that help. Similarly, making it reliable. A lot of tribes have asked for help with respect to microgrids and creating that resilience and redundancy when the lights go out. We have, because of the president's agenda, we have resources now to be able to help. So let me give you an example. Tribes now have access to hundreds of millions of dollars in grid upgrades, in rebates for energy efficient appliances. I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars are available. And our loan programs office also got a significant boost in our tribal loan guarantee program. And for the first time, tribes are now, we heard the difficulty of accessing that. And so we made sure that it's easier by not requiring a commercial bank be a loan guarantor. We want to make sure that we are hearing and adjusting our programs to be able to be accessible to you. Just finally, what really makes these programs successful, though, of course, is the making sure we are at the table with you, nation to nation, and making sure we're listening. And so strengthening these tribal relationships and partnerships has got to be key. And in that vein, I want to just put two things on your calendar. For those of you who are interested, first, next Monday on December 11th, my Deputy Secretary Turk, he's going to be holding another consultation session for DOE's Order on Policy and Tribal Consultation. Some of you may remember at the beginning of the administration, we held our first consultation on this, and now we've taken your feedback and then want to feed that back to you. In other words, share our proposed revisions with you. And then second, on February 27th and 28th, DOE is going to hold our next Tribal Clean Energy Summit, where we'll talk together more about how we can continue to break down barriers and make these funding opportunities and technical assistance available to those who would like it. And I want to thank Chairman Mark Macaro of the Pechanga Band of Indians for hosting that. Registration for that is open now at energy.gov/Indian Energy. So with that, I'll turn it back to Wahala.
Thank you, Secretary Granholm. And now we want to hear from Chair of the Council of Environmental Quality, Brenda Mallory.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here and to be on this panel in particular. And I love the fact that we started off by grounding the discussion in the impacts that people are actually seeing on the ground, that we are here to try to talk about how we can address, and to have the Secretary, of course, pick up with a theme that you'll hear come through my remarks, which is about the importance of partnership and working with you and listening and acting on the things that we hear. So I'm going to basically take my few minutes to just talk a little bit about some of the work that's already gone on. That's an effort to kind of bring together all of the themes that I think this administration has reflected from day one, which is a recognition that it is important for us to improve, to do better in our nation-to-nation relationship, to recognize the importance of that, the sovereignty of the nations, to act on the treaty rights, to act on other rights that are important in the tribal and indigenous world, and to make sure that we are creating the opportunities for hearing, listening, and moving forward. And so I think a number of examples of work that's gone on, that the President and the Vice President have really led on, really show how we're trying to do that. And with climate change being so critical to what we're all dealing with and impacting tribal nations more significantly and first, it's really important that we kind of pull ourselves together to actually act in partnership. So a couple of things that I just wanted to touch on. First of all, just acknowledging that this is a president and an administration that is undertaking the most ambitious climate and conservation agenda in history. And that is not just because we like to do those things. That is a recognition that we are in a situation in which we have to act now. We have to act to address climate, and conservation and environmental justice and equity are very much a part of that. And I think that's a theme that I think we see in our work overall in working with tribes. And doing that requires really taking different approaches, as the Secretary was talking about. We have historic funding, thanks to this president, in order to work on issues that are important for these challenges. But we know that business as usual will not make those funds reach the communities that need them most. And so very much trying to kind of restructure how we approach things so that we are able to address those crises. I want to start with an action that the president took several months ago, which I think kind of crystallizes a number of different themes. And that was his designation of the Ba Nuwajo Iktak Kukvini ancestral footprints of the Grand Canyon National Monument. Yes, worth a clap. And I will say, as someone who had the honor to stand behind the president and the tribal leaders who were there, just being able to recognize the significance of an action like that, both in terms of listening to tribal communities that had been working for decades to try to lift up this area and to have this type of designation occur, recognizing that the effort that folks had put into it, and that we and this administration heard that. And then to hear the president on the stage acknowledge how it was a significant action because we know that the Grand Canyon existed because of the removal of Native peoples from that land, and that this was a small way or a step towards recognizing that injustice and moving forward. And the Grand Canyon is a phenomenal example, not only for the sacred value that it holds for the Native peoples, but also as we think about climate change and we think about our biodiversity crisis, it's an important step in that direction. As we think about what it means to honor the history of folks who have not gotten attention in the past, it's a great example of that. And on our just overall issues relating to conservation. So I think that's a great one to just start off with. And I will say one other thing that really touched me during that designation was that the president was introduced by Maya Talusi Little, who is a Native teenager whose mother is on the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, and who I am grateful for her participation. But she reflected on what it meant to kind of see something that she had grown up learning about being an importance in her history and her culture, and to be able to stand there as a representative of the next generation as we moved and turn the corner in history. That was just very both striking and touching, and I think is a moment that I think we want to look to for how do we combine all of those themes that I just described in one place. We've also had similar energy when we designated the Avikwame National Monument, which the president did before that. And again, another place where there was a real tribal push for this designation over many, many years, and is very important and representative for Native peoples. And so another example of how we can act on what we hear and have it really serve these combined purposes. I think the administration, and we've already heard it, recognizes how important it is for us to come together to help in preserving the homelands that people are fighting so hard to protect, particularly as we face the climate crisis and the ways in which it is impacting communities. And one of the sources of input that we use at the Council on Environmental Quality is the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, which is a body of experts across the country who have been focused on environmental justice, which includes tribal representatives and academics who are focused in tribal areas. And that is a source of input that we get information and recommendations on things we should do. And one of the things we set up with that group is a work group that is specifically focused on tribal issues and trying to address some of the major concerns that folks are addressing, and how we do it in ways that, again, that honor the culture and the tradition of folks. Another thing that I want to mention, just in terms of being central to pulling in and recognizing our work with tribes, is the Environmental Justice 40 Initiative. And the Justice 40 Initiative is the president's commitment to deliver 40% of the overall benefits of investments in the climate and clean energy space to people who have generally been underrepresented. And we include in that tribal members in our climate and economic justice screening tool with CEQ put out last year. It designates areas that are tribal lands as communities in which we try to prioritize where resources go. And so that's another place in which that focus on needing to do something differently if you want to have the outcome that you want is really important. A specific grant that is very much part of that program is the Climate Justice Community Change Grants that EPA recently announced. And here again, grants.gov is where you should go to learn more about those and what the opportunities. It's a new way of doing many of our programs, and I think creates an opportunity for folks. And so I'm gonna stop there and say thank you all for being here, and I think it's really important that we continue this partnership moving forward.
Thank you, Chair Mallory. Next, we're gonna go to, a good colleague of mine, Brian Newland, Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs at the Department of Interior. Brian?
Miigwech, thank you, Wahela. Buju Minogijip. My name is Brian Newland. I serve as Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs. I'm Ojibwe from the Bay Mills Indian community, way up at the top of northern Michigan, or way down south for you, Chief James. I'm gonna be brief, and my mom always says to me, she says, "You lawyers are always talking about briefs. You're never brief." But I'm gonna do my best. You know, you've heard a lot already this morning, and you'll hear over the next day and a half about the administration's commitments. But at its core, I think it can be best summarized as a mission statement that we believe that it is our trust responsibility to protect the ability of every Native person here in the United States to lead safe, healthy, and fulfilling lives in their homelands. That's our mission statement. And so much of what we're going to talk about is flowing off of that. And 3 years ago, related to that, President Biden made a commitment to Indian country that his administration would make it easier for tribes to place land into trust. And for the first time since the Indian Reorganization Act was passed almost 100 years ago, this administration has completed rules to make that process easier and to fulfill President Biden's commitment to make the land into trust process easier. And we're really excited about those revised regulations. And this commitment also includes addressing climate change, because we have to protect the ability of tribes and Native people to live in their homelands, to stay in their homelands. Just this past July, this administration announced here at the department the availability of $120 million in grant funding for tribes across the country to make your communities more resilient to climate change. So for perspective, the BIA has been issuing these tribal climate resilience grants for more than 10 years. And this round of funding this year, thanks to the President's Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, this year's grant announcement is more than the previous 10 years combined for tribes. And that is funding that's available to tribes across the country to address however climate change is impacting you. In some places that's drought, in some places that's wildfire, in some places it's flooding and coastal erosion. It might be the degradation of ecosystems that affect your ability to harvest foods that you've always relied upon. That funding is available to help make your communities more resilient to climate change so you can stay in your homelands and lead those safe, healthy, and fulfilling lives where you've always been. In addition to that, we have made this historic investment across President Biden's administration. I can say from my previous time working here at the department in an earlier administration, you know, President Biden's commitment to asking all of our agencies across the government to work together to solve problems is very real, and we've been able to do that. And so we have invested, just through the Department of the Interior, more than $135 million in community-driven relocation for those tribes that are acutely and immediately affected by the climate crisis. And we have worked with the Department of Energy, we've worked with FEMA, we've worked with USDA, all across this administration to make this possible. And so you've heard from Chief James about what that means, a $5 million investment in Gwich'in, and I was able to visit last spring. Thank you, Chief James, for hosting us. She got me out on the dance floor to do a jig with some of the community youth, and thank you so much for never showing anybody the video of that. And you'll never see it. And I was also able to visit Quinault last spring as well. to see what is nearly a $30 million investment into their work to relocate their community off the coast. And that also gives places like Quinault a chance to reimagine what their tribal communities look like going forward, and to build a community that reflects their values, that puts, I see you've put your elders and your youth at the center, the literal center of your new community, and done that in a way that promotes walkability, homes that are energy efficient, new clean drinking water, water lines, all these things. So not only are we making investments into tribal communities that, as you said, Chief James, you make the decisions about how to address these challenges with our support. It's a chance to build a new community going forward, in a community that isn't based on how the BI, how we used to be, and say, you're gonna do it this way, to do it your way and reflective of your values. And so we're really proud of that work. We're proud of this partnership. And under this president, we're gonna continue to put our money where our mouth is when it comes to doing things like addressing climate change and supporting tribes making these decisions about how to fulfill that mission. So I'll stop there. Miigwech, thank you so much.
Thank you, Assistant Secretary Newland. Next, we'll go to our first question with Secretary Granholm. Question is, how has Department of Energy supported the President's prioritization of tribal co-stewardship?
Thank you, Ahila. And I think one of the most important, a recent example, I'll just say, of this, and Brian, to your point about the President's leadership in making all of the agencies of the federal government together and aligned on preserving sacred spaces. We all signed an MOU inside of the federal government, as many of you know, in 2021, about making sure that we were of accord in interacting and in respecting and in communicating with tribes. And so in that vein, last year I visited what is known as the Hanford site. This is a big 586-acre site in Washington, D.C., where the Manhattan Project was making weapons for World War II. And that 586-acre site is actually the ancestral homeland to the Yakima, the Umatilla, the Nez Perce, and the Wanapum people. And over the course of time, as the cleanup was going on in this 586-acre site, the federal government had sort of walled it off. I mean, fortunately, the sacred sites had also been protected, but the tribes could not access them in the way that they should have been able to, right? So when I went there last year, I sat down with the tribal leaders, and they were telling me about how they were restricted from being able to, have ceremonies, do traditional, activities, especially with respect to medicine, et cetera. They were very frustrated that this was their ancestral homeland, and because of national security reasons, it had been shut off to them. So that really moved me, and they asked for my help. How can the federal government come to our aid and allow us to work together to give us access and stewardship over these sites? And so when I came back, I thought, this is exactly why we have this MOU among all of the agencies, is to be able to make sure we do this right. Now, one of the federal agencies that is part of managing that area is Fish and Wildlife. And so came back, and I thank God we have Secretary Haaland, who is very sensitive to all of this, and of course is leading this MOU, but came back and said, what can we do for this area? And so this week, Department of Interior, Department of Energy, and the tribes signed an MOU that will give them input and responsibility for managing these sites in a way that respects their ancestors, their heritage, their practices. I'm so excited about this because they had been asking for this for so long. And if it weren't for the leadership of this president, the leadership of Secretary Haaland, this would not be happening. So it's one example of how this administration is really listening and acting to be respectful of, of our tribal relationships and of Mother Earth. So, thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Granholm. Our next question is for Assistant Secretary Newland. History has demonstrated that the more the federal government restores tribal homelands, the better it is for tribes and the environment. However, tribal homelands are also some of the most at risk as the impacts of warming climate, our planet. Could you comment on how Interior is thinking about and working on protecting homelands in conjunction with addressing climate change?
Thank you, Wahela. You know, in our Ojibwe language, we have this phrase, Minopamadzwin, which, we talk about, the literal translation is living a good life, but it embodies a lot more than that, about being in balance. And so many tribes have versions of that in your languages. And so that also includes living in and restoring the balance of the world around us and all of our relatives in the environment around us. And so you mentioned it in your opening remarks, Wahela, about 80% of the biodiversity in the world is often stewarded by indigenous people. And that includes here on this continent. So when we're talking about addressing climate change, that throws everything out of balance. It throws everything out of whack in our ecosystems, in our homelands. And so by restoring lands to tribal ownership and tribal stewardship, that allows the people who have been stewarding those lands for millennia and maintaining that balance to resume and revitalize that work. And so just one example of something we're doing, relates to Secretary Haaland's Keystone initiatives and under the President's Investing in America initiative, with making investments in bison restoration. I see President Starr comes out here from the Oglala Sioux tribe, and others from the plains know that when the bison were killed off, the Great Plains ecosystems were thrown out of balance and out of whack. And so by working with tribes to restore their lands and then also make these investments to restore bison on those lands, it brings those lands back to their natural state. It helps return balance to prairie grass, which can store carbon and makes those ecosystems healthier. And so we've engaged in this partnership here at the Department of the Interior to put real money into that. So in addition to making the process of putting land into trust easier, in addition to restoring 3 million acres to tribal ownership by reducing fractionation, we're also now investing in the work that tribes will do to steward and manage those lands once they're back under tribal control. That's just one example. We don't have enough time to go over all the examples.
Thank you, Assistant Secretary Newland. Next, I'm going to turn to Chief James and Director Johnston. This is a question for both of you. The Biden administration has sought to center tribal leader voices in federal policy development and implementation. Given that both of your tribes have experience, which you shared, the effects of climate change, can you comment on the administration's initiatives and how they've helped your tribe or your nation, and what more needs to be done?
What more could be done? I think that's the next step, or in the process, is that climate change, the reality of it, that we need to accept it. We also need to do something about it within our resources, especially in the natural resources in our land, protecting our land. What can the administration do? I think once any tribe that does get a grant, I think the knowledge and the task force should be set up on climate change affecting the communities. It is true that we're having a flood and everything else, but we also need a task force with our elders that has knowledge of it to help our young people that's taken over our tribes. And also when we fund it, like I said, let the community and the elected officials decide what's best for them in the community.
Thank you. Director
As was already stated, 120 million is a historic investment from the Biden-Harris administration to start to move the needle forward from climate-related impacts. Targeted investments such as these are sorely needed in Indian country. For many of us, our traditional science, traditional knowledge, we've already known that climate change is an issue well before it became popularized in the mainstream and accepted by mainstream science. And so now that these targeted investments are starting to occur, tribes that are smaller, that don't have access to capital, are finally getting the resources they need to move from the planning phase and into the implementation phases of their work. Another thing that's important to remember when we move into this era and start addressing these issues meaningfully is that I think it's essential that we incorporate the self-determination principles and self-governance framework for this new funding opportunity. This allows for the maximum flexibility and ability for tribes to implement their own innovation. It's hard sometimes when federal funding or other resources become available and there's a lot of red tape or there's a lot of things that make it difficult for us to truly create a plan that meets our tribe's values and needs. So allowing us to move forward as a value set that we have maximum flexibility with these resources is going to be paramount. There's 567 federally recognized tribes right now, and all of us are going to have different adaptation strategies and different priorities moving forward. So boxing us in and keeping us in kind of bureaucratic red tape is really not going to work if we want to continue to make meaningful change. By having this flexibility that's built into the pilot project now, Quinault has been able to leverage that federal investment for additional resources in the private sector and as well as from state funding. We're able to receive another $12 million by being able to leverage this federal resource from the state of Washington from a carbon reduction act that they prioritize that allowed us to further supplement this work. But when you look at what the total costs are going to be required in our communities, we costed this out years ago, pre-pandemic, and we're looking at, for one village, $150 million to $200 million of capital needed to really move our villages out of harm's way. But now, post-pandemic, we've seen construction costs, expertise, and other assistance that's necessary increase by a minimum of 40% across all sectors. And so this is very costly work, and without access to capital to do anything about it, it just becomes a plan that sits on a shelf. Any climate policy in the United States that's adopted isn't going to be successful unless it meaningfully includes tribal nations. Any climate policy that exists now isn't going to be successful if it doesn't meaningfully think about the treaty relationship and the trust responsibility that we have between the tribes in the United States. Projects like the ones we're working on, the pilot project for the CDRP, I believe should be made permanent and operationalized as a framework for all tribes as we inevitably come to terms with the climate-related impacts that our future generations will face. Centering tribal voices, our science, our innovations, maximizing legal flexibility, access to capital, and supporting public-private partnerships is paramount if we're going to co-create a just future, not only for Indian people, but all people that we share this planet with. So, thank you.
Thank you. Great. Next question, we're going to Chair Mallory. Could you comment more on how you center tribal nations in decision-making, such as the designation of Ba, Nu, Wajo, I, Ta, Vini as a national monument? And I apologize if I mispronounce that, the translation of that national monument at the Grand Canyon in Arizona.
It's not emotional. It's just my voice is gone. Yes, I mean, I think, and as I said at the top of my remarks, just recognizing that we have to respond to and listen to what our tribal partners are telling us about what's important as we move forward. And I think on the monuments front, we heard from lots of people, and that's not unusual, but we don't always follow up in the ways that I think are necessary and appropriate. And I think on that monument, there was just a lot to work with and a lot of partners who were together. But I think we're trying to integrate that same kind of that same ethos in the way that we approach conservation in general. And you've heard some examples, but like the fact that, the ideas around co-management and co-stewardship and cooperative agreements are increasingly part of the way that we think about how we operate actions or operate some of the conservation measures in fish hatcheries and in the parks themselves. Like, those are important steps, and they're going to vary because obviously there's different legal frameworks that cover different types of land, but just leaning into the idea that there is important, there is history and value. And like just as someone mentioned, just the whole idea of indigenous knowledge actually being lifted up in a really significant way. We did guidance, I think, either at the last tribal conference or the one before, but we realized that we really had to create a framework for the federal agencies to use in thinking about how to approach indigenous knowledge, to recognize that the indigenous knowledge belongs to the indigenous people. And so but creating a way in which we can benefit from, obviously, I mean, the fact that your comment about the 80% of biodiversity, that is really significant. And just being able to be mindful of that, I think, has been really important. So all of these are tools that I think we are just trying to increasingly make part of business as usual instead of where we are now.
Thank you. And a follow-up question to Assistant Secretary Newland. With the recognition of the Grand Canyon National Monument, this proclamation furthers the President and the administration's commitment to protecting spaces that are sacred to tribes. Could you comment on the importance of and how it fits into the administration's work protecting lands like the Sacred Sites MOU Best Practices Guide?
Sure, thanks, Wahela. And I was excited to learn just before we walked up here on the stage that Secretary Mayorkas has signed on to the Sacred Sites MOU, bringing that to 9 cabinet agencies. Yes. That's a big deal because it allows us to hold each other accountable within the federal government and allows us to work from the same standards and same processes. But just generally on co-stewardship and co-management, and many sites for ceremonies, many sacred places are found on what are now called public lands, because those lands were taken through various means, and they're no longer in tribal ownership on paper. But that doesn't mean that there's not an interest. In a protected interest in protecting those places and accessing those places. And so, the co-stewardship initiatives, the Sacred Sites MOU allows us to support tribes in working toward that protection. And I'll say one last thing very briefly about co-stewardship. Sometimes people think about this as something that the government is doing for tribes. Co-stewardship is, something that's, given to tribes. And, I think we always like to point out that this benefits the entire country because the United States manages, hundreds of millions of acres of what we call federal public lands. Why wouldn't we want added capacity, added expertise, millennia of knowledge and understanding of how to manage those lands? Why wouldn't we want people who have that at the table to benefit not only Indian country, but the entire country? And really, when we're talking about climate change, this is a global effort. This co-stewardship brings your expertise, your knowledge, your understanding, your relationship to your homelands to the table for the benefit of all people in the world. And so it's not something that that the federal government does for tribes. It's something that we're doing for everybody, because Indian country will play just an absolutely critical role in helping us solve climate change, helping us protect these places, and making them exist for future generations. So thank you, Mahila.
Thank you. We are going to turn it over to the audience questions and answers now. So I think we have Tony Dearman and Jonna Blackhair to help identify tribal leaders.
Yeah, hello, my name is Jimmy John Thompson. I represent Tamisha Shoshone Tribe. We're located in Death Valley National Park. I also sit on several committees, Trim Tech and NetWig. We deal with nuclear waste and storage, transportation. And there's a lot of talk about the clean energy. We're located in California and Nevada, as I spoke earlier. And a lot of this clean energy push is getting pushed into Nevada, a lot of the mining. And some of it's even being funded by the federal government. None of the funding is going to the tribes, and we also feel like we are going to be the ones facing the biggest impact there. The entire state is just being overrun by folks from Canada and South America looking at the lithium mines and everything else, including nuclear. And we're concerned. We don't want to look back at this in 20, 30 years and see all of our lands as a Superfund site, and that's how we see it's going to happen. And it's all going to be in the name of clean energy. I just want to point out that we are very concerned, and we would like to see something done about that. It just isn't looking in favor in our way. Just want to point that out.
Thank you for those remarks. Next question.
Good morning. My name is Cheryl Andrews Maltese, and I'm the chairwoman of the Wampanoag Tribe of Gayhead Aquina on the island of Nope. Most people know it as Martha's Vineyard. Thank you for being here, and I appreciate the work that you're doing. However, we're concerned in the East, and particularly our coastal tribes, because while we're pursuing the clean energy of 30 by 30, we're ignoring the negative impacts of wind energy that are having a detrimental effect on our sacred sites, our ceremonial sites, and our submerged underwater archaeological resources, as well as what it's going to do not only on the East Coast, but throughout the Gulf of Mexico, as well as the West Coast. Can you fix it? Thank you. So what we'd like to do is find out from Secretary of Energy, as well as others, what are you going to be able to do to help our tribes protect our resources, cultural, spiritual, and traditional, as well as working to get a better understanding of what these enormous wind turbines and their residual effects are going to have on our underserved and underrepresented communities upon which the backs of all of this industry is being placed. And we don't feel that it's fair to us, and it keeps getting omitted from an important factor of what the administration and Indian country's interests are. Thank you.
So I appreciate this and the prior comment as well, because one of the ways that we are addressing this is that any project that is getting a grant from the Department of Energy must have a community benefits plan that includes, if it touches upon tribal lands, that it includes tribal interests being considered in this plan. The community benefits plan is our way of embedding an assurance that we are respecting lands, waters of tribes. What that plan does is we evaluate, we get way oversubscribed for all of these projects. Huge numbers of entities want to be able to access grant money, as you can imagine. But we are actually rating these projects. 20% of the evaluation is on the community benefits plan. If there's not a good community benefits plan, they're not going to get funded. And so it has never happened before in any administration that a community benefits plan has been required in order to get grant funding. And, you know, obviously in tribal country, that is involving the tribes, but in disadvantaged communities, it's involving disadvantaged communities that have not been at the table. But the point is to get to the table those who are impacted. And we don't want to be funding entities that are going to be destroying sacred sites, obviously. We don't want to be doing anything that damages the land and the water and the air. And at the same time, we recognize that the planet is on fire and that we have a huge sense of urgency about trying to remove greenhouse gases and not being reliant upon fossil fuels, which create carbon pollution, which cause climate change. So and I know you all, and I know climate change has been top of the list. We at the Department of Energy have a lot of the technological solutions, but how those technological solutions are deployed in place depends on communities. And so I just want you to know that we are really working on this piece of things in terms of how we can fund. Now, things that don't require DOE funding or private sector may be doing other stuff that doesn't impact us. But what we're focused on is making sure communities are at the table.
Thank you, Secretary Granholm, and I appreciate the questions and really want to also, we're out of time, unfortunately. There are going to be many of us from different agencies that will be here and happy to continue to further the discussion. And I just want to appreciate all of you relatives for making the travel here and participating at this Tribal Nation Summit. I also want to thank the Chief James and Director Johnson for also traveling and being on this panel. Your input is very valuable perspective that you shared. I'm going to take that to a lot of the work that I do. So I just want to thank you for being here and sharing those words. And then also leaders here, it's just amazing to be in partnership as we continue to work towards providing solutions. And I always say, tribes are leading the way. We've been seeing it in a lot of the opportunities or grant opportunities that we help to support in our office. There's over 200 mostly clean energy projects that tribes are leading and have been leading for over 10 years. So I just want to give you all a round of applause and then also the panel. And thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
please welcome Secretary of the United States Department of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack, and Chef Rob Canine, Chef Crystal Wapapa, Chef Joe Robbins, Chef Francisco Alegria, and Chef Leah Husby.
Well, good morning, everyone. It is great to be with all of you again, and I've brought a few friends who are going to be introduced in just a few minutes. Excited about today because we have a series of announcements which I think reflect a continued commitment to Indian country at USDA. Very excited about the opportunity that we announced today in conjunction with the House and Senate Committees of Jurisdiction on the establishment of the USDA Tribal Advisory Council and Committee. We believe this advisory council will give us an opportunity to even strengthen our nation-to-nation relationship, acknowledging and respecting the knowledge and wisdom that can be gained from this opportunity to visit with members of various tribes about areas of interest to tribes. And one of the areas that we know is of significance is the way in which our forests are maintained and managed. Last year at this conference, we committed to entering into at least 60 co-stewardship agreements with tribes across the country for the management of our forests. And candidly, when I made that announcement, I was concerned that we might have overcommitted. But it turns out that's not the case. As co-chair of the White House Council on Climate Change, Homelands and Treaties Committee, I'm really pleased to announce that we significantly surpassed that 60 threshold with 120 new co-stewardship agreements with the USDA and tribes. One of the examples is the Tlingit tribe in the Tongass National Forest in Alaska. We've entered into a co-stewardship agreement with the Mendenhall Glacier Recreation Area with that tribe, and I want to thank President Peterson, who I know may be watching this in Alaska, as well as First Vice President Peta, who is here today, for their work in making this new opportunity happen. I also know that one of the things that's important for tribes is an understanding of the role that we can play in working to expand economic opportunity and to expand opportunities for food sovereignty. To be able to do that, you have to be able to process the indigenous animals that are harvested and the meat that is important and necessary for subsistence. That's why we established the Indigenous Animals Harvesting and Meat Processing Grant Program, which is really designed to advance food sovereignty and economic opportunity. We're beginning the process of making announcements today. In fact, we're announcing 4 grants in an effort to begin the process, and we expect that we'll be announcing significantly greater numbers in the near future. In Montana, Fort Peck is going to receive resources to be able to expand their cold storage capacity for bison, elk, deer, antelope, and pheasant. In the Oregon-California border, the Tallawah-Dene tribe is receiving resources for expanding their processing capacity to be able to process fish, deer, elk, and salmon. In Alaska, the Alutiiq tribe of Old Harbor is receiving resources for modernizing their facility, where they use traditional methods to process game, fish, and bison. And St. Paul Island is also going to have the opportunity to provide resources for their processing operation for reindeer. So this is the beginning of providing resources to expand processing and storage capacity so that indigenous foods can be more readily available and utilized, and jobs can be created in Indian country. We also recognize, especially in Alaska, the issue of subsistence is something that is incredibly important and near and dear in and to tribes. We want to work to ensure that the young people also understand and appreciate the role that subsistence plays and how they might best be able to continue to protect their subsistence rights, especially in Alaska. For that reason, we're entering and announcing today into an arrangement with the Sitka Conservation Society to develop a curriculum for young people so that they can better understand what those rights are and better be able to utilize them relative to the Federal Subsistence Board. And we're excited about that cooperative opportunity to join together to ensure that young people fully understand and appreciate the rights that they have. And speaking of subsistence and speaking of food sovereignty, we're excited about launching the first ever bison purchase pilot program for our food distribution program. We know and appreciate how important it is to make sure that bison is available as part of the food offerings. So we're working with 4 pilots, the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe, the Ron Brown Otter Buffalo Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, the Lower Bruel Sioux Tribe, and the Dakota Pure Bison Rosebud on the Sioux Reservation will be working with the USDA to establish this pilot. We'll learn lessons from it and hope to be able to learn from it how to expand that opportunity in the future. So this is an exciting new opportunity for, in essence, a public-private partnership in which we can build access to indigenous foods. Speaking of public-private partnerships, we're also launching today a new public-private partnership, which is really focused on ensuring that we continue to work with reference to bison in particular. We're joining forces with the Intertribal Buffalo Council, the Native Americans in Philanthropy, the Nature Conservancy, and the World Wildlife Fund for bison conservation. Opportunity for us to work together in this area. And finally, we are really excited about the collaboration that we have and will continue to have with the North American Traditional Indigenous Food System effort. I'm accompanied today by a series of chefs who will be introduced in just a few minutes. But we're working hard, and they've been working very hard over the course of the last several days with SIPI to basically produce amazing box lunches. Now, I will tell you, folks, when you have meetings like this, and you all have been part of these conventions, and you get those box lunches, and you kind of ask yourself, where does that food come from? And you're not really excited about eating it. But today and tomorrow, that is not going to be the case. Today and tomorrow, you're going to see an amazing array of presentations that are delicious and have been produced with love and affection by these chefs and by folks who have been working with them. So it's my honor to introduce Chef Rob, who's going to introduce his colleagues, and to thank him and all of these chefs for the amazing work that you've done in preparing box lunches that are really worthy of this audience. So, Chef Rob, you're... You didn't have to use those glasses to produce the food, did you?
No, luckily not. Are we live? Okay. I just want to say hello and thank you for the kind introduction, Mr. Secretary. I also want to introduce my fellow chefs, Crystal Wapapa of the Kickapoo, Sac, and Fox tribes, Francisco Alegria and Leo Husby from the Menominee tribe,
and Joe Robbins from the Penobscot tribe. And I am Rob Kineen. I'm Tlingit from Alaska. So powerful words today. Thank you. An additional thank you to Chef Leonard Bailey of the Tribal College Culinary, and the Tribal College Culinary students from the SIPI, or Southwestern Indian Polytechnic Institute, for helping us execute the Food for the Summit. I am the Outreach Director of NATIFS, North American Traditional Indigenous Food Systems. Our mission is to promote indigenous foodways and facilitate indigenous food access. We're proud to partner with the USDA on these indigenous food sovereignty efforts. They include education, cooking videos, and recipes to introduce more people to indigenous foods. This week, we are honored to create the menus that prepare the meals for the White House Tribal Nations Summit. The menus have highlighted the variety of indigenous foods from tribal producers. Also, if you also attended the Tribal Nations reception last night, we prepared the 7 appetizers for that as well. So hope you made it. If not, you missed out. Today we have a smoked salmon donated by the Cowlitz Indian Tribe on a seaweed salad with ingredients from Sea Alaska's Barnacle Seafoods. Or we have a stuffed turkey featuring Red Lake Nation wild rice. Tomorrow we'll have a smoked fish soup with Oneida white corn, or a chili with buffalo from Cheyenne River Sioux and Tapari beans from Ramona Farms. All right, so thank you so much.
Chef, thank you very, very much, and certainly encourage you all to enjoy those meals and understand that this is part of our effort to begin to expand significantly our initiative focused on food sovereignty. We look forward to a compelling report at next year's summit, so thank you all.
Have a 15-minute break. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats at this time. Please welcome to the stage the panel on next steps to address the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous people.
Yes, I am live today and watching with enthusiasm online. Thank you, Secretary Vilsack and Indigenous chefs. I wish I could be there for lunch. I know that many of my colleagues have been and will be there with you today, and I'm so grateful for all they do for Indian country. I'm honored to moderate today's White House Tribal Nations Summit panel on next steps to address the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous people, and to join this important conversation virtually with some truly incredible experts and advocates. Today's panel will highlight the progress that has been made and the work ahead to tackle this crisis alongside our partners, several of whom are on the stage today. This legacy of violence has left no community unimpacted. This panel is intended to elevate the perspectives of Native leaders and experts who are in the fight against this crisis and the violence that impacts Indian country every day. Since day one, the President and our entire administration have worked with tribes to develop policies reflective of the on-the-ground needs of law enforcement, to reinforce tribal jurisdiction, and ensure adequate resources are there to exert that jurisdiction, and to develop and advance holistic, culturally informed action that disrupt systemic violence within our communities. Some of the initiatives we'll discuss today include the President's 2021 Executive Order on Public Safety and Justice and MMIP, the implementation of the Not Invisible Act, a law I was proud to champion in Congress, the work of the Not Invisible Act Commission, and the implementation of the Violence Against Women Act. Under President Biden's leadership, we are finally beginning to tackle this centuries-long epidemic that started when colonization first began. It is difficult but necessary work, and together we are making real, tangible progress. On today's panel, we'll hear from tribal and federal leaders and experts. We hope to also have time for question Q&A, and please know that we have our amazing Interior staff in the room and who also will be at lunch with you and who are happy to speak with you further about this issue or any issue. It is now my pleasure to introduce our panel. Judge, and please, I am not there, so please raise your hand if you can, so I know where you're sitting. Judge Michelle Demert, who serves as the Not Invisible Act Commission Commissioner, I'll call that NIAC, a NIAC Commissioner from the Central Council of Tlingit and Haida. Thank you for being here. Councilman Philip Williams of the Yurok Tribe. Thank you so much for being here. Sergeant Boz Windy Boy, who serves as NIAC Commissioner and is also on the Yakima Nation Police Department. Kristen Welch, the founder and executive director of Waking Women Healing Institute and also a NIAC Commissioner. Rosie Hidalgo, the director of Office of Violence Against Women at the Justice Department. It's nice to see you again, Rosie. Thank you for being here. Timothy Langan, executive assistant director of Criminal Cyber Response and Services Branch at the FBI. And Allison Ramsdell, U.S. Attorney General for the District of South Dakota. We are so thrilled to have you all here today. And with that, we'll just get this conversation started. Question 1 is for our non-federal panelists, and I ask you to limit your remarks to 4 minutes each so that we have time for everyone. This is the question. Over the past year, the Not Invisible Act Commission held 7 in-person hearings and testimonies to gather public comments from survivors, families, and relatives of victims of violence in Indian country. Just this month, the Commission submitted a report to Congress, DOJ, and DOI on the findings of the hearings and recommendations. Could each of you comment on your experience with and the importance of the Commission and what is needed to make the recommendations in this report a reality? And we'll start with Judge Demert.
Thank you, Secretary Haaland, and thank you for your hard work in getting the Not Invisible Act Commission Act passed when you were in Congress. We owe you a debt of gratitude. So that is an excellent question. We need a decade of action and healing. Our families need answers and hope that the Not Invisible Act Commission will help effectuate real change. They trusted us with their stories. We shared these stories with Congress and the administration. Let's make the NIAC report matter. Let's act on all of our recommendations. Something is wrong when year after year, our Indian women are murdered at 10 times the national average, missing at high rates, and Indian women and children are sexually assaulted and trafficked at disproportionate rates. We matter, our families matter, our survivors matter. One of the Commission's most important recommendations is for the federal government to honor its trust obligations and provide sufficient funding to fully address unmet needs in tribal communities, targeting the most critical public safety, criminal justice, health care, and victim service needs. We need meaningful financial aid, and we have proposals for how that can be accomplished. Some of it is just a simple redirection of funds. The U.S. spends billions each year to protect and preserve democracy and stop genocide across the world, but yet fails to provide meaningful aid or funding to American Indian and Alaska Native villages. The BIA publishes a yearly unmet need report to Indian tribes and Alaska village governments. The unmet needs are a fraction of the aid given to foreign nations. Our people are dying. The lack of public safety in our communities is a humanitarian crisis. We fit the definition. Yet the unmet needs identified in the BIA report fails to make it to the president's budget or congressional appropriations for us, domestic dependent nations. Is this a breach of trust? Congress must pass legislation requiring DOJ and its subagencies, including the FBI, to submit an annual unmet needs report similar to what is required of DOI for the Tribal Law and Order Act. Let's compact DOJ funds rather than grants. Have DOJ make recommendations to Congress to provide for this recommendation. Other funding options? Restrictions in the Victims of Crime Act do not serve victims. A simple fix would be to allocate 5% to Indian tribes to improve justice systems, infrastructure, and victim services, including but not limited to intergenerational and historical trauma. Simple. A new funding option, federal leasing of oil and minerals. We know these man camps and extraction industries prey on our women. The administration and Congress should require that a percentage of the revenue from these federal leases goes to fund public safety for Indian tribes. There are already studies by the FBI on this issue in the impact of mining and oil on our public safety. Gaming compacts could be used as a model for how to craft the language within these leases. For Alaska, we have never gotten meaningful, consistent tribal justice or public safety funding. Our land was given to for-profit corporations in the 70s. One recommendation is any village or regional corporation's taxes should be directed to a tribal justice and public safety fund. For the administration, we need a permanent Native Nations office at the OMB to help coordinate executive branch federal funding programs and policies, including those related to MMIP and human trafficking. Please appoint an Associate Deputy Attorney General in the United States Department of Justice to work exclusively on Indian laws and policy issues. We would welcome a strong statement from President Biden that builds on his 2021 executive order on public safety. President Biden, please declare a decade of action and healing for tribal nations and then challenge Congress to pass a resolution. These declarations will have force and provide a pathway to action, especially when you adopt our financing proposals with needs-based budgets. Goodness Cheesh. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that articulation of what needs to be done. We'll move now to Sergeant Windy Boy.
Thank you, Secretary. Tanse nichpachway. Kotlanusha shamchichin nitpa. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Baz Windy Boy. I currently serve as Sergeant in the Yakama Nation, Public Safety, and I have 15 years experience in law enforcement. Being appointed to the Non-Visible Act Commission as a non-federal member has been very special. The inclusion of tribal law enforcement in a federal commission has been very eye-opening to me, and hearing other officers speak across the country has been a great way to understand that we all suffer from the same issues and the same lack of officers in our areas. So I currently cover I live on a 1.3 million acre reservation, and I cover about a quarter of that. And we just recently hired 10 more officers, so I'm stretched pretty thin, including our seated, our other areas that we cover as well. But it showed in hearing everybody else speak across the country, the other tribal law enforcement, and watching them and understanding that they need the help, and it was special because they actually came out and they opened up to each and every one of us. Watching them speak to us about their mental health and just how much stuff that they've been going through and living with. Being an officer is, I don't really think about it a whole lot, but there's so much stuff that we need to cover at our homes. There's so much that they just they don't know how to express themselves, and I understand that. It was really hard for me to come forward today and open up about how everything works back home. So I could see what they're all going through, and hearing that they're all short-staffed, that we're all having a hard time, just covering our basic areas, but then we'll always be there, and no matter what. And that's what was really special hearing from each and every one of them. The chiefs that came forward in Albuquerque was really special, and hearing what they had to say, and then watching them band together when they had nowhere else to turn to it was nice. Like I didn't realize how much need, like they need the help. So with our recommendations, we focused a lot on mental health for police officers in Indian Country. Our second recommendation focused a lot on retirement and recruitment, because there's a lot of us that leave to go to state agencies and federal agencies because they offer a retirement. Police officers, tribal officers don't get that option. I haven't got a retirement my whole career, and that's 15 years of work. It was also touched on towards the end that we needed more female officers. There was a huge request for more female officers. But getting females to be patrol officers is pretty hard. I've definitely tried to get as many as I could back home, but it takes a special lady to do the work. There's a lot of stuff that we go through, a lot of stuff that we see, and to keep all that inside, you don't really realize how much you're carrying. So watching everybody go over how their agencies are ran and how they never let it go. Like they keep it all inside, and they're just holding on to it. And it was really special to watch that in Albuquerque, and I appreciate each and one of my fellow officers for doing that. Our third recommendation that we had brought forward was, it was included with recruitment, and it had to do with trying to cover education benefits, getting people in college interested in being law enforcement officers. And I know the BIA director had touched on that some during our meet, so I'm kind of proud to hear that he is doing something to help with that. There wasn't a whole lot of feedback from officers. We're pretty straightforward, so I really look forward to hearing what the outcome is of all the work that we've done and the sacrifice of the time that we all made, because we all did all of this work while doing our at-home jobs. And it was really important. I'm really proud of these ladies and everyone else that was on the commission. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sergeant Wendy Boy. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for serving our country, and appreciate your response. We'll go next to Executive Director Welch.
Poso, for all my manams out there. Poso mawanawit, natamatamo, natakam, wapashe ni totem, kayas mamachitok, omat no manewik, Anishinaabe Kwendao, Made Kwendao. I just want to say, Matchwell Wannon, it's an honor to be here, speaking to all of our leadership here and being present with these amazing panelists. I had a really hard time, like, how do I condense this experience of what it was like being part of this commission? And I just want to thank all of our fellow commissioners, all of the leadership that made this happen, all of the people in the background, the facilitators, the writers. Like, we didn't do this alone. There was more than 3 of us. There's an entire army of advocates and survivors and family members and federal partners that came together to make this commission work happen. And honestly, my first response was, that's what it was like. It was intense, it was healing, it was powerful, and it documented our survivors and our family members' truth. And I think that's the power of the report, is that it's not just a dead thing, it's a living, breathing document, and it's our families and our survivors' voices and stories within that document. And because of that, it is our responsibility to do everything we can to move those recommendations forward. We have incredible leaders in this room that can rally behind our survivors and our family members and say, we heard you, and we're going to make sure that this moves forward. And our federal partners as well have to carry that responsibility. We heard about the truth, the painful truth of what our survivors and our family members experience every day. That loss, that grief, and so many of our families and survivors have to put that pain on hold and go investigate. They have to become boots on the ground search and rescue teams. They have to navigate the criminal justice system alone, as complex as it is. They have to become caretakers for the children that are left behind. And that's just a little snippet of some of the issues that our family members and survivors face. There's a mistrust in the system because it has continued to fail us over and over again. This is not the first time we're asking for these recommendations. Hundreds and thousands of advocates and tribal leaders, and many reports came before this that are asking for the same thing. Stop causing the harm. There must be accountability for those that are causing harm, and give us the resources because we know what to do. We have the solutions. The impacts of when we have relatives go missing and murdered is not a single pebble. It is an incredible ripple through Turtle Island. When a relative goes missing in Alaska, it's felt in our communities in Wisconsin because we all know that pain. There isn't a person in this room that doesn't understand that pain of the violence that our relatives are facing. We have to address those intergenerational traumas that are the impacts of this epidemic and the violence we're facing. There are too many of our relatives and survivors that turn to alcohol and drugs to numb the pain because the grief is too much. There are too many of our survivors that are homeless on the street because they can't get in because they either don't fit the checklist criteria or that shelter doesn't look and feel safe to them because it is not culturally founded. We need solutions that are created by us and for us, and I think that was the important thing of this commission, is there were survivors and family members at the center of the work, and it has to continue to be that way when we implement these recommendations and move them forward. Some of those recommendations that we talked about is let's heal the root cause. We understand that, yes, we've faced incredible hardship and pain because of this epidemic and trafficking, but we are also incredibly strong and resilient. Our culture is the key that's going to move us forward. Our connection to culture has the ability to heal any wound, no matter how deep. And that's what needs to be at the foundation of our programs, of our services, and the way we think when we're implementing and developing programs. They must be founded in our culture. Another recommendation was that we need to increase access to Indigenous social determinants of health. That is a public health and safety and justice issue. We need to increase safe and stable housing, and especially housing that has the ability to care for the complex needs of our trafficking survivors and our families that are left behind. We need to take care of special needs populations and high needs populations and protect our youth. Think about our youth in the foster care system. We need to hold that system accountable for the harm that's causing and make sure when that our relatives come out of that foster care system, they are protected. They have access to housing, education, connection to culture, those Indigenous social determinants of health. I don't think we can uplift that enough. It came up over and over and over again. Not just the pain was testified in those hearings, but the solutions were testified in those hearings. Healing and response teams. There's this beautiful, amazing woman in Alaska from a coalition. She had the whole document. Here's a healing and response team that is a wraparound approach. It's going to focus on healing. It's going to provide systems navigators. It's going to provide resource liaisons. It's going to connect our survivors to all of the help they need in a holistic, culturally founded way. There are many solutions out there that have been rolled out already that are doing a great job, like the Missing Murdered Unit. And we know that we need that expanded. It's doing its work. How can we increase that budget? How can we increase access to more agents? How can we give them the reach in PL 280 territories and non-cooperative jurisdictions so that they can do the work that they need to do? We also wanted to uplift the 2023 MMIP regional program that was rolled out. That recommendation was to increase their budget in perpetuity. They are a liaison from the local level to the federal level, and it gives us teeth to move the things forward that we need moved forward. Give them the ability to do the work and make sure that they have the capacity to do it. One coordinator for a region is not enough. They are going to be overwhelmed with cases. Let's support them and make sure they have the infrastructure to do it. And if we're rolling out programs for our families and our survivors, don't take them away from us. If you've implemented something and it's working in our communities, back it, fund it, do everything you can to make sure it's maintained. Like I think about VOCA being cut right now by 40%. These are lifelines for our community members. These are recommendations that were uplifted within the work of the commission. And I just wanted to say on behalf of one of our Alaska relatives and Commissioner Vivian, let this be the spark. Let this report be the spark that ignites a movement of healing, that decade of action, of healing and action for our communities that's needed. And wouldn't it be amazing, she said, if every single tribal leader signed on to support these recommendations? So that's my challenge to you, to answer her call, to answer our relatives' call. And I just wanted to say, Wawanan, it was an honor to do this work, and it's an honor to be here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. We will go to Councilman Williams now. And appreciate it if we could stay within the 4 minutes so that we have time for everyone to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Secretary Haaland. Skuyanagoi. My name is Philip Williams of the Yurok tribe. Listen to all you fellow panelists, got me emotional. The Non-Invisible Commission, when they came to town, it gave us hope. It gave us hope that somebody's listening and that somebody cares. Growing up in a community where our own trustee, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, was beating our heads up, fighting us over fish wars, keeping us from exercising our rights. The Non-Invisible Commission came and heard our stories and heard our communities pour their hearts out. I myself was able to provide a testimony. My whole life has been traumatic, and it goes all the way from my ancestors. It goes to my great-great-grandmother, who was born in 1865, and in her lifetime she was not able to go out and gather traditional foods because she would be raped or beaten by soldiers. That goes all the way back up to where we are now. In 2015, I lost my own daughter. And I identify with all the hurt and the pain that all these other families go through. Because we're in a rural environment where we'll never know the answers of what happened to our loved ones. This gave us hope to families that are still dealing with that trauma of wondering what happened to their family member. And it wasn't just, women either. I have best friends of mine that were murdered. People that I've known my whole life. I'm 56 years old, and I've had a lifetime of loss. All the way going back to high school. Nobody cared. It all gets dropped pushed and forgotten. But the families don't forget. We don't forget. The Not Invisible Commission gave us opportunity. We don't really know if it's going to move forward, to be truthful with you. But we hope that it does. I hope that the research and the data that was accumulated is not put on a shelf in one of these buildings here and collected dust and forgotten about. If you ask for my recommendations, I'd ask you, Secretary Haaland, to keep this alive, because we can't solve this in 1 year, 3 years, or 5 years. This fight is so great, it's going to take generations to heal the wounds for our people. I have hopes. The reason I'm here today is because I have grandchildren that I want to be healed. I want to have a healthy life. And so I continue this fight for all Indian people, the Yurok people, and I use my heart. Walk loud. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. And before we transition to our next question, I just want to offer a heartfelt thank you to all the commissioners of NIAC who spent their time and effort traveling around, meeting together, coming up with all of the recommendations for the report. I know that some of these conversations were sad and really heart-wrenching. And so I just appreciate your sacrifice and everything you did to make this a reality. Thank you. Question 2 is for our federal panelists. Again, I'd like to ask that you speak for 4 minutes. And I understand that there is a timer there on the stage, so if you could glance at that every now and then, that would be great. We just heard from the NIAC commissioners about their experiences with the Not Invisible Act Commission and the expectations for the recommendations in the report. How is your office planning to engage the substance of the report and leverage the report's insights? And we will first turn to U.S. Attorney Ramsdell for the answer.
Thank you, Secretary Haaland, and thank you for inviting the U.S. Attorney community to be part of this conversation. It has long been a priority of the Department of Justice to address the disproportionately high rates of violence experienced by American Indians and Alaskan Natives, and relatedly, the high rates at which Indigenous persons go missing. As the NIAC report underscores, there is a crisis of violence and abuse in Indian country, and the department is committed to working with NIAC to address that crisis with the urgency it demands. But what does it look like on the front lines at the U.S. Attorney's Office? As the chair of the Attorney General's Native American Issues Subcommittee, which is comprised of U.S. attorneys across the country who deal with Indian country, I can tell you we've spent a great deal of time with this 210-page report. We've reviewed it, we've discussed the recommendations, and we're working on a response. As these conversations evolve, specifically as they relate to the U.S. Attorney community, we see the recommendations falling into 3 categories. First, there are recommendations about existing resources that can be leveraged, and we wholeheartedly agree with these recommendations. Some examples include increasing the use of special assistant U.S. attorneys from tribal communities, using cross-deputization agreements, and utilizing state forensic laboratories to expedite criminal investigations. We recognize that no single entity can keep tribal communities safe, and so we back leveraging these existing resources as force multipliers in community safety. Second, there are recommendations that relate to existing programs, and we are committed to expanding those programs and refining those programs. I think the first of these is training. We have the National Indian Country Training Initiative within the Department of Justice. It's a robust training program committed to meeting the needs of those of us in the field and doing so in a manner that's accessible to our tribal partners and others out in the community. In the past year alone, this institute, which we call NICD, organized 25 separate trainings on violence against women and children and issues related to MMIP. The department's also implementing a strategy to educate the public about NAMUS, including outreach to tribal organizations about how to use NAMUS effectively. These trainings are free of charge to federal, local, and state criminal justice entities, to social service organizations, to medical personnel, and to tribal leaders. And NICD will continue to expand these programs in response to the NIAC report. There's also the MMIP Regional Outreach Program, which Ms. Welch referenced. In June of this year, the department announced the creation of this program, which permanently places attorneys and coordinators throughout the country in 5 separate regions. The U.S. Attorney community supports this program, and we will leverage these AUSAs and coordinators to assist in resolving cases where federal jurisdiction exists and bridging gaps in communication. Other notable programs, which I'll talk about later, include the Savannah's Act guidelines and tribal community response plans. Finally, the third bucket, there are recommendations that were new to us, but fall squarely within our area of expertise. And I think we can roll these out locally pretty quickly. And things that come to mind include establishing regular multidisciplinary team meetings to address missing persons, expanding tribal prosecutor training to include court personnel, and developing a community awareness program where we go into the community and educate about the federal criminal justice system, specifically about violent crime and murder and human trafficking. So we look forward to evaluating the utility and feasibility of these recommendations and others alongside our federal partners, and we seek input from all of you who've read the report on which recommendations are most meaningful to you.
Thank you very much, U.S. Attorney Ramsdale. We'll now move to Director Hidalgo.
Good morning, and thank you so much, Secretary Haaland, for your vision and leadership in implementing the Not Invisible Act Commission and in collaboration with the Attorney General Merrick Garland. OVW's Principal Deputy Director was one of 6 representatives from DOJ on the NIAC, and we are so grateful for the tremendous dedication of the commissioners, not only those on the stage, but all the others who participated, and tribal leaders and others who gave testimony, including survivors and families, and coming together to really acknowledge, as we all have said, that this demands urgent action and prioritization. And part of receiving that NIAC report, the Department of Justice has 90 days, along with the Department of the Interior, to issue our response to that. And we are hard at work, as the U.S. Attorney here has mentioned, in really compiling how best to continue to expand on these commitments and dedication to addressing this. I'm honored to serve as the Director of the Office on Violence Against Women at the U.S. Department of Justice and implement the Violence Against Women Act, which the Secretary referenced, critical legislation that's our nation's commitment to preventing and addressing sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, stalking, and other interconnected forms of gender-based violence, including sex trafficking. And so the work that we do to implement VAWA really focuses in 3 main areas. One is getting out critical resources through grants out to communities. And as you mentioned, it's getting those resources in the hands of those who best know how to do this work. And it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. The second way is through national training and technical assistance. And third is through advancing policies. So real quickly on our grants, we have more than 20 grants, but there's some specifically focused, as you all know, on getting these resources to tribal communities through our Tribal Governments Program, our Tribal Sexual Assault Services Program, our Special Tribal Criminal Jurisdiction Grant Program, and also funding some of the Tribal Special Assistant U.S. Attorneys. So this year, fiscal year 2023, we were able to issue historic amounts of VAWA funding, which increased over 30% under this administration. And of the $633 million that was put out there for communities to do this work, $68 million specifically went to support tribal communities in doing this work to address these issues with American Indian and Alaska Native communities, and all the grant programs also. We want to continue to support that access. We have an amazing Tribal Affairs Division that when I last worked at OVW in the Obama administration, there were 4 individuals, now it's 14, and growing, and hiring tremendous advocates from tribal communities to be part of that team, including 2 in Alaska, to continue to support the tribes, to access these resources, to have the flexibility, and to do the work as you all best know how to do, rooted in culturally appropriate practices and traditions of healing, of safety, and justice. And real quickly, every time VAWA gets reauthorized, it's an opportunity to strengthen those protections. And it's thanks to the tremendous leadership of tribal advocates, tribal leaders, that VAWA 2013 included provisions affirming and recognizing inherent authority of tribes to have special tribal criminal jurisdiction in cases of domestic violence and dating violence. And also, again, through the leadership of tribal leaders and advocates in VAWA in 2022, when it was reauthorized, it's expanded recognition of that inherent authority, including in cases of sexual assault, stalking, sex trafficking, when non-native perpetrators of this abuse are the ones who cause these harms in Indian country, and holding them accountable. So we are really grateful for all the ways in which the leadership of tribes, including through our annual government-to-government tribal consultation that's so key for OVW to implement and support and work in partnership with all of you. We had the opportunity, when I first started as the director in August, I had the opportunity to go to the tribal consultation that was hosted by Muskogee Creek Nation in Oklahoma. And in 2024, it'll be in New Mexico. And we want to continue to support all of you. And real quickly, and I know my time, and Secretary, I respect that, real quickly, I want to announce that one of the new programs that we are going to be putting out our notice of a new funding opportunity from VAWA 2022 to get federal reimbursement for the implementation of special tribal criminal jurisdiction, as well as advancing a lot of this work with Alaska Native villages and rolling out pilot programs there as well. So thank you for your leadership, for your tremendous partnership, and we look forward to continuing to strengthen that.
Thank you very much, Director Hidalgo. We'll now move to Executive Assistant Director Langen.
Thank you, ma'am. So the FBI, we continue to look to improve how we investigate and bring justice to tribal communities, and I'll talk about three separate areas that we look to work on. One, collaboration, resources, and our operations. So as far as collaboration goes, one of our main pipelines of investigative actions is through our Safe Trails task forces. We have over 25 Safe Trail task forces, and this includes over 550 task force officers that are embedded with our task forces from tribal communities, from BIA, working together to investigate crimes. With that, we're looking to increase our partnership with BIA. We've now embedded a BIA analyst directly with our Indian Country unit at headquarters. And what this will help do is develop our strategy and resource implementation directly where it's most needed, with communications back in FBI headquarters. And so we really look for that to be an increased collaboration. As far as resources goes, this was, in 2023, was the largest resource increase to Indian Country that the FBI has ever seen. We increased our resources by approximately 25%. It's larger than any other program percentage-wise that we increased. So there was some significant efforts made in the last few years trying to bring justice to tribal communities and engagement with the FBI. And then to wrap it up with the operations, right? That's really where the rubber meets the road. What are we doing? And one of our operations is Operation Not Forgotten. And what the Bureau did was looked at multiple cases, cold cases involving murdered individuals, missing people, assaults, crimes against children. And what we did was we connected 200 different investigations. These are cold investigations that didn't have leads. We surged resources to 10 field offices to try to make some headway on these cases. And this initiative started in just July of this year, in 2023. And just since then, we've been able to conduct 40 arrest search operations. We identified 4 children that had previously been unidentified for unfortunate victim child of violence. And we also located 1 missing child, so just since July. So that kind of sums up those 3 buckets from the FBI. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Next question is for Judge Demmert and Sergeant Windy Boy. As I mentioned, we are running short of time, so I would appreciate you staying within the time allowance, which is 3 minutes now. Given the critical importance of strong tribal jurisdiction and effective and appropriate cooperation among local and federal authorities, I'd like to ask Judge Demmert and Sergeant Windy Boy about the role of tribal jurisdiction and any recommendations on how the federal government can help reinforce tribal jurisdiction. We'll go first to you, Judge Demmert.
Goodness, Chief. So I've been an attorney and a tribal court judge in Washington, Oregon, an attorney in Washington and Alaska, but a tribal court judge in Washington, Oregon, Alaska, and California for nearly 30 years, and jurisdiction continues to befuddle our tribal, our federal and state partners. And with all due respect, Director, Deputy Director, when we asked the FBI to come speak at the Not Invisible Act Commission, they didn't see the point of it because they didn't have jurisdiction in our 229 Alaska Native communities. And so a lot of these things sound good, but they have no meaning for us if we don't meet the definition of Indian country. So let's hold these individuals accountable. Nothing personal, but it's just really emotional for me to hear about all these things that are available, but not available in Alaska. So anyway, jurisdiction. I'm gonna give you some talking points, and I hope that you take these to the agencies and your Congress. Let's remove jurisdictional restrictions. VAWA made huge impact and positive changes. Let's continue that. We finally have some movement in Alaska, but we need some help and resources there. Congress must enact legislation addressing the Castro Huerto decision. Justice Gorsuch's dissent outlined one possible approach. Let's see that through. We need to move towards recognizing full tribal criminal jurisdiction. Our children, our families, our women are unsafe because we do not have full tribal jurisdiction. And until that day happens, we're going to see perpetrators prey on us because they know that they will not be held accountable. Let's get rid of those barriers. Public Law 280 is a policy that undermines public safety and is an affront to tribal sovereignty and the federal-tribal relationship. Tribes located in Public Law 280 states have been shut out of compact public safety and justice funding. We get none. As for Alaska, the administration programs in all statutory language should be amended to include Alaska villages. When you use the term Indian country, it excludes us. We matter. We need to be included to every program that is mentioned. Introduce and pass the Honoring Tribal Nations Act, introduced by Warren and Kilmer last session. For true healing, we need to have the Truth and Healing Commission on Indian boarding schools passed. The MMIP crisis, increased violence, lack of jurisdiction is all interconnected. Deborah Parker this morning just mentioned to me that they found records in the 1850s of our little girls being murdered and or being sent away for disciplinary matters and going missing. That's just, I mean, the generations of pain that we have. Finally, we need the federal government to respond and implement the Not Invisible Act Commission recommendations in a timely manner. That's what the Decade of Action and Healing is all about. We cannot just have this one moment in time. We need to move on, like our chair said. Thank you, Ganesh.
Thank you, Judge Demmer. Thank you very much. We'll move to Sergeant Lynn Newport.
Thank you, Secretary. So the area that I cover, I'm a non-mandatory PL 280 state. So I have a checkerboard jurisdiction, and it gets confusing at times, even after we went through retrocession. There's so much area that I cover, and I am still cut off from the rest of my officers. I work along the sheriff's office. I work alongside with state patrol and the city officers. The tribal police officers we barely got computers. We're still cut off from the rest of the state jurisdictions. Our internet service is very patchy, I guess. It comes and goes. It'd be nice to have the cross-jurisdiction coverage between all the agencies, just because I don't know what's going on. I'll just share that I was T-boned by a drunk driver in an intersection, and it took a long time for my assistants to get to me. They didn't know where I was. They didn't know what happened. All they knew is that I was hit by a car, and I was upside down. So I really hope that at one point that the tribal police are able to get coverage when it comes to broadband coverage, when it comes to anything in our patrol cars, and being able to communicate with the surrounding jurisdictions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sergeant Rooney. Boy, that's not too much to ask for. Thank you. Question 4 is for U.S. Attorney Ramsdell and Executive Assistant Director Langen. You have 3 minutes each. In what ways have U.S. Attorney and the Federal Bureau of Investigation partnered with tribes to address the MMIP crisis? We'll go first to U.S. Attorney General Ramsdell.
Thank you. Well, at the heart of what we do at the U.S. Attorney's Office is prosecute federal crime. That's our duty. And so I want to share a quick example with you from the MMIP Regional Outreach Program, that new program in the Great Plains region, which is South Dakota and Nebraska, North Dakota, Wyoming, and Alaska. We have an AUSA appointed to this work, and last month he achieved a resolution in a case from 1992 involving the murder of an 18-month-old girl. He did this alongside a tribal police officer and an FBI agent who got a tip, and they ran it down. They reinvestigated, they got an expert analysis, and they elicited a confession to voluntary manslaughter. That's the success of our prosecutions. That's, like I said, the core of what we do with our tribal partners to be responsive to crimes that are happening, whether it be immediately or over time. In the Department of Justice, cold cases are not closed cases, and we'll continue to work those matters. I mentioned earlier that I'd talk about the Savannah's Act guidelines. That's something we're doing with our tribal partners to address the MMIP crisis. Whether our districts have jurisdiction in Indian country or we're PL 280 states, all U.S. attorneys' offices worked to implement Savannah's Act guidelines in the spring of 2022. And those are guidelines that talk about the cooperation between law enforcement in cases of missing persons. They set forth best practices in conducting searches, the standards for collecting and analyzing data and human remains, and ensuring access to culturally appropriate victim services. Again, those were issued in 2022, and we are committed year after year to going in and updating those so that they are responsive. Related to that are tribal community response plans. Those are plans that internally tribes can create to respond to missing persons. We support this work, but importantly, it's led by tribes. We want your plans to be responsive to your community needs, to incorporate your cultural considerations, and so we come alongside you at your invite to develop these tribal community response plans. And then I think what's so meaningful about the work we do in the U.S. Attorney's offices are the opportunities we have for outreach. We've come alongside tribes to help do simple things like put photos in these missing person databases so that these cases are more than names. Talking with your youth about the precursors, the vulnerabilities of becoming a missing person, right? Drug use, being reckless on social media. And we're happy to come out and engage in speaking opportunities or going on MMIP awareness walks, anything we can do to come alongside tribes and raise awareness on this crisis. We look forward to continuing this conversation, and we invite any of your thoughts in our individual districts. Thank you.
Thank you, U.S. Attorney Ramsdell. I didn't mean to give you a promotion during this panel, but thank you. And we will move to Executive Assistant Director Langen next.
As I mentioned earlier, collaboration is the key for us, whether it's a formal relationships from our Safe Trails task forces or informal partnerships with tribal police in any area. I think that's where we spend a lot of our time trying to improve our operations. One area is multidisciplinary teams, where we found that if we combine the investigators, both at the state, local, tribal, federal level, combine them with the prosecutors involved, with family services, with victim services, and we look at these problems, we look at cases in a holistic approach, it ends up yielding a much better result, and it makes sure that we're inclusive of all the victims and when trying to bring justice to crime. So that's one area, this multidisciplinary approach, that hopefully we'll see some increased benefits there. As we mentioned on the panel too, data. Data is a huge, complex problem. It's a problem in the government in general, but it definitely affects tribal communities. And trying to make sure that we've got the correct, timely data on missing individuals and individuals that may have been victims of crime. So we're working very closely with tribal communities. There's two initiatives that we're leading, one out of Albuquerque, one in Phoenix, where we're helping the communities identify, collect that data, make sure the data is in a usable, appropriate manner to where we can distribute leads appropriately to other states, other offices, to try to attempt to bring justice to some families. And then I think joint training is always the key to make sure that we're operating on a baseline, a similar level. So we have a joint training initiative. It's a 2-week basic violent crime for tribal communities, where we help officers, prosecutors, tribal police learn the basics of crime scene management, of shooting investigations, of crimes against children, and to try to help them better implement the tools that we can try to provide to tribal communities and engage more effective manner to bring justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have one last question, and we're going to try to fit it in. We heard many times about the importance of healing and victim services in the fight against MMIP, including preventative measures for violence. I'm going to direct this question to Councilman Williams and Director Hidalgo. Could you comment on the importance of victim services, healing programs, and preventative measures? Councilman Williams, you have about 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. Fortunately, we have our Honorable Judge Abby Abenanti, who's spearheading our restorative justice project. And she's identified one of the leading things to MMIP is mental health. And we're working on MOUs with our local law enforcement officers. Our jails have been used as mental institutions, and they're not equipped. And so we're trying to create culturally based victim services, where we have in the works, we're creating a wellness facility. If some of you know where we live at in Northern California, we live in some of the most beautiful parts of California. And we know that our area will heal the people, along with our culture. Thankful to Governor Newsom, Attorney General Bonta, giving us the money to create this facility. We also know that on our next phase is outpatient facility. The outpatient facilities can be some of the most effective ways to get to the people that are hurting. The reason they're missing or murdered is because they're undervalued. The communities do not value people with mental illness, including our own communities. And I want to speak to the tribal leaders in this room. You have people in your communities that are homeless, that are addicted to drugs, that are down there on the street asking for money. We've got to quit shunning them. We need to bring them in. We need to help them with the love and compassion we have for one another. I do this regularly. I go through the homeless encampments, searching for our people, looking for ways to get them out of there. We're looking at the homeless encampments now as a concentration where we can actually put our program managers, our caseworkers in those encampments to work them, because they're already there concentrated. So we're looking at ways to work with what we have right now. The outpatient facility has a lot of hope for us, where we can administer the medications, we can give them telehealth services, we can feed them, we can take care of their health needs, we can give them culture, we can teach them all the things they need to overcome the hardships of this life. And that's what we're missing is nobody's teaching that this life is hard. It's hard to be in this system we're in now as a Native person. And sometimes you give up because it's too hard. But we have to continue to prop those people up, people that I love, my cousins, my family, my sisters, my brothers. They have value in this community, and we need to uplift them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Councilman Williams. We'll go to Director Hidalgo. You have about 2.5 minutes.
Great. Thank you so much. I think as we listen to these statistics that and we recognize the urgency, it can seem overwhelming, and yet we know that those statistics don't define tribal communities. We know how important it is to support that strengths-based approach. And we know that individual incidents of domestic violence, of sexual assault, are not just isolated, solitary events. They do reflect, over time, the systemic and institutional failures. They do reflect intergenerational and historic trauma. And so I think it is a moment, as you've mentioned, for all of us to come together to look more holistically of how do we get to root causes. And to your point, Secretary, with your question, how do we also look at healing? How do we look at safety, justice, and healing as so crucial? We had the opportunity in this administration to launch our first ever national plan to end gender-based violence, and really talked about the need for a public health and a public safety approach, and how we're doing those kinds of victim services. And through our tribal consultations, for example, something we recently heard was as people are bringing forth children who are victims of sexual abuse, there are adults disclosing that they are adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse who never received the support, the opportunities for healing. And so we're looking at exploring ways to strengthen and provide victim services to adults when people are bringing forward children who are impacted. We also are hearing the need to fund more of the behavioral health, mental health services that are so crucial in a much more holistic approach. So those are things that we're very committed to. Also through OVC's Tribal Victim Services Set Aside, they also have been making those funds more flexible to help families access additional resources for mental health and healing for families impacted when loved ones, when relatives are missing or murdered. And so how we can continue, to your point, to expand access to resources, to look at these issues more holistically. Also, through the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act just last year, for the first time in VAWA, there is now funding for restorative practices programs. And we know a lot of those traditions are rooted in tribal communities, and it's an opportunity through these resources to fund also a wider range of access to justice as people may define that. We want to continue to make sure that for those seeking justice in the criminal justice system, that we continue to expand that, but we know we need multiple pathways to how people define justice and how some restorative programs can also work with those who cause harm and with those who've been harmed in other ways, working towards healing and accountability in communities. So we look forward to, in partnership with you all, as we roll out those programs. And then also, finally, real quickly, some of our resources, for example, we recently funded 2 Alaska Native villages, $1.5 million each for a 5-year period of time to really begin to more holistically develop the kinds of programs we need. So again, we look forward to this continued partnership to do this work in this more expansive manner. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Hidalgo. And I again thank all of you so much for your service to our country, for this thoughtful discussion. I'm sorry that we do not have time for audience Q&A on this panel. Please know that our doors here will always be open to you. We also have my amazing staff who you'll see. I know all of you know Heidi Totticini, who worked very hard on the Not Invisible Act Commission. When you see her, you can ask her questions. You can ask my other staff questions. They'll be with you at lunch as well. Thank you all again so much, and I look forward to continuing these important conversations.
We will now break for lunch. Please follow the usher's directions to the basement for lunch. Please visit the library if you still need a colored dot for breakout sessions or a printed badge. Please begin returning to the auditorium at 12:50 p.m. to ensure adequate time to go through security. It is recommended that you leave large bags and coats at your seats to expedite security screening. Thank you.